Writing four-part learning objectives. The learning objective is a concise statement that defines the specific knowledge, skills, and abilities a student is expected to demonstrate from a particular learning activity or a lesson. It is not a course competency or a goal that outlines the overall abilities or knowledge students should develop by the end of a course or a program. While there are additional ways to create learning objectives, this video will cover the four parts of a learning objective. Let's start with the condition. The first part of the objective is student-centered and describes the conditions under which the learner will be expected to perform in the evaluation situation. Next up is the who. Who will be completing the learning experience? Now it's time to add the behavior that you wish to measure. It describes the observable action using appropriate verbs, Bloom's taxonomy, along with the task. And last but not least, we add the criterion, which clarifies how well a learner must perform to be judged adequate or passing. Before I demonstrate writing objectives using the four-part process, I want to share some important do's and don'ts with you. You want to write your objectives in order, keeping the condition first, the who second, the behavior third, and the criterion at the end of the objective. You also want to use only one measurable verb to ensure clarity and focus. One measurement allows for precise assessment of whether the student has achieved the intended outcome. Using two measurable verbs in a learning objective can create multiple expectations that are difficult to assess simultaneously. What would happen if I was able to discuss community-based public health interventions, but I was not able to design a community-based public health intervention? Would I have met this double-barreled objective? No, I would not. So it is important to make sure you're only using one measurable verb. And lastly, do not use understand in a learning objective because it's vague and subjective and it really is difficult to measure. Your interpretation of understanding may be different than others' interpretation of understanding. When creating learning objectives, we want to make sure we are using the highest Bloom taxonomy verb based on the assessment and the level of your expectations. Let's take a look at one assignment and see how we can progress to higher levels that actually meet the assignment parameters by changing the verbs. The lowest domain is remember, and I selected choose for this learning objective, so choose a community-based public health intervention. Moving up a level to understand, I selected discuss. For the apply domain, I selected apply. While we are getting closer to the goals of the assessment, we are still not quite there. Next up, in analyze, I used examine as my verb. Now we are getting even closer to what I want the students to do with evaluate, but still not quite there yet with recommend as the verb. We are now in the highest domain, create, and I selected design because it actually aligns with what I want my students to do and allows me to measure if they can design an intervention. So as you can see, it's important to make sure that you are aligning your objectives to your assignments or assessments. I just mentioned aligning my objective with the assessment to measure student learning. It is also important to remember that you need to align the competency to the assessment or assignment, to the learning objective, and to those instructional activities to help you bolster your student success. Here is an example of an alignment. As you can see, the competency, select communication strategies for different audience and sectors, aligns with the assignment where they're designing an infographic and a 2-page policy brief that can be measured by the learning objective, generate a communication tool for diverse audiences, and the learning and instructional activities can support the learning process. All of these are aligned to create a cohesive learning experience that you can measure to determine if your students have met the goals and the learning objectives that you have set. Now that we have covered the condition, the who, the behavior, and the criterion of the objective, as well as some do's or don'ts, let's go ahead and build some objectives. We always start with the condition, which describes the conditions under which the learner will be expected to perform. So here is example 1, by the end of the course. Example 2, after the completion of this training. Now we're going to add the who to our objective. So by the end of the course, the student is the who, will be able to, and after the completion of this training, the participant, the who, will be able to. Next, we use Bloom's taxonomy to complete the behavior section of the objective. Once you have the concept and the activity assessment idea, you want to look through the verbs and select the appropriate one that aligns with the assessment. Our behaviors are write for our first one. So by the end of the course, the student will be able to write learning objectives, which is the task, as well as after the completion of this training, the participant will be able to interpret statistical data. Now we're at the end of our objective. This is where we add the criterion. For our first example, I have selected correctly. So by the end of the course, the student will be able to write learning objectives correctly. And after the completion of this training, the participant will be able to interpret statistical data in 1 hour or less. Remember, learning objectives should start with the condition, then add the who, next comes the behavior, and then ends with the criterion every time you write a learning objective. They should also only contain one behavior. And last but not least, alignment matters.